Greetings and welcome to NewsLink, brought to you by the Camellia Rose, Georgia chapter of the Links Incorporated. I'm Dr. Katrina Covington Whitmore, your moderator, and I am so happy you have chosen to join us. We have a lot to talk about, and we invite you to join in the conversation and find out what we can do to elicit change and to make a difference. I'm proud and happy to welcome viewers from across the state and beyond, and a special shout out to the link chapters that we know are joining us on this podcast. Thank you so very much. So thank you all for being with us, and please feel free to drop any questions or comments you might have into the chat. They'll be forwarded on to me, and I'll pass them on. The 2024 Georgia legislative session, land-grant universities, and voter registration is what we'll be talking about, and we'll have two accomplished experts in all three of those areas to fill us in. Camellia Rose is proud to welcome Georgia State Senator Sonia Halpern, who has been in the thick of things and who, as a state elected official from the 39th District, can provide a unique perspective to the current state of the state. Thank you, Senator, for being with us.
Glad to join.
Thank you so much. And I'd also like to welcome Andrea Young Thomas, Esquire, the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU. And we are proud to say she is also a member of the Camellia Rose chapter. She and her organization have been keeping a really close eye on the things that have been going on. So welcome both of you, and thank you all for being here. And a reminder, we might be getting some comments and questions from those of the people that have been joined us this evening. First up, the 2024 Georgia legislative session. There are specific bills and legislative actions that we're going to address specifically, but I have a few overall questions first. And beginning with you, Senator Halpern, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, how would you rate the 2024 Georgia legislative session, and why would you rate it that way?
Well, good evening. Thank you so much for having me join you for this great and important conversation. I am thrilled to have a conversation about what happened in 2024. I would say that I would rate it a 7. I mean, that is to say that we did some good things. There are some very good things that I think happened in 2024. There are also some things that I really, truly wish did not pass and were not on its way to the governor's desk or have already been signed by the governor. But given that this is an election year and understanding that politics can really, take and overshadow good work, I would say that this was not a year, despite it being an election year, where we saw too many terribly atrocious culture war bills like we've seen in the past couple of sessions. There were definitely bills that we're going to talk about that are not good and are certainly not good for our communities. But I will say that many of those bills that were introduced did not actually make it over the line. And so I think that that is something to be really grateful for. So I'd give it a 7. Could have certainly been better, but I've definitely seen election years where it has been astoundingly worse.
Okay, Andrea, the same question from your perspective, ACLU.
Well, from the perspective of ACLU, I think I give it a 4. I agree with Senator Halpern that we'll talk about. I mean, we were able to block some key culture war kinds of bills. It certainly started off to be a lot worse, and it wasn't a session where you saw major rollbacks of civil liberties like 2019 when the abortion ban was passed, or even even classroom censorship.
Yes.
So some of the major so in some ways they've done so much damage to civil rights and civil liberties, they that some of the things that are remaining are so extreme. But we did see some rollbacks of civil rights and civil liberties. We still see pressure on access to the vote, that the impact of the lie that somehow the 2020 election was stolen. You still see the impact of that. So we continue to have a lot of work to do, and we appreciate everyone who is part of this conversation, because you know democracy is not a spectator sport, and so everybody has got to be on the field. Everyone needs to be participating, so that our legislators are doing the things that are really the priority of the Georgia people.
So I read that there were more minorities as elected officials in this year's legislature than in previous sessions. So, Senator, what kind of impact did the additional minority presence have on any legislation?
So that is true. So we work in terms of biennium. So that's every 2 years. So this most recent biennium represented 2023 and 2024. So coming in out of the 2022 elections, we in fact did have more diversity in the Georgia General Assembly than we ever had before. We had 83 total members out of 236 that were non-white. And I want to kind of tick down a little bit. So we have 4 Hispanic members, 7 members of the Asian American Pacific Islander community, 2 Afro-Latino members, and an Arab woman, um, and 69 Black members. There were also 81 women. We also have, did I say 4 members are Muslim, 1 is Jewish, and 81 women, one more than the last time. And just for framework here, especially talking to a women's organization, 10 years ago, there were just 55 women.
Mm.
So we have seen a pretty good increase. And what that means is that with more diversity at the table and more representation, you are seeing legislation that is being advanced by members of these diverse communities that are really representative of the communities that we reflect. And because you have us at the table, We are able to contribute our voices to conversations on a wide range of topics. And even if we're not stopping certain bills, we're certainly figuring out ways to ameliorate the bills and, in general, advance conversations that previously wouldn't even be taken up at all. You've got now a Georgia Legislative Black Caucus, which you've had for decades. But because of the numbers of African, Asian American, and Pacific Islander, and now Hispanic members, we also have an AAPI caucus and a Hispanic caucus. And those three caucuses together, towards the end of this session, began to really work in coordination. So, in addition to just having more voices and more entities, the ability for us to thread together our efforts and work together will really make a difference as we continue to move forward and add those numbers. So, the reflection of Georgia inside of the General Assembly really is a statement and a signal about the changing demographics in our state and what that will eventually mean for us in terms of the work we do and for our democracy here in the state.
Yeah.
And do you see a positive impact with that as well, Andrea?
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And from the perspective of the ACLU, the strength of the Black Caucus is really is very powerful and very helpful. So some of the process that we go through is because we have such really strong and effective representation. Many of the bills that we are concerned about can be changed in committee because these members are sitting in the committees. They're asking the tough questions. They're calling on witnesses, but often they're also challenging some of the assumptions that and misinformation that sort of gets brought in to this process. I think we have the largest Black caucus of any state in the country. And they are and they're very well positioned. They're in the minority in terms of the parties because this is we unfortunately still have a trifecta in Georgia where the Republican Party is in power in terms of the House, Senate, and governor. It would be helpful if we could break that up, then we could get more bipartisanship. I think there are a lot of things that we could do, like Medicaid expansion, that if we had, if there was some diversity in terms of party control, that actually creates space for some of the people in the other party who actually support some of the things that we are concerned about: criminal justice
Mhm.
reform, health care, First Amendment, privacy. Many of these are bipartisan issues, but the the way that the legislature functions right now, um, we can work in coalition to block. It's hard to move forward some of the measures that are really important, probably to people on this call.
So, what can we do, or how do we get those issues to move
Mhm.
forward? How do we wrestle with this bipartisanship that we seem to be having that seems to be a roadblock?
It is, I think, that combination between, I mean, so you've got a political ecosystem, right? And everybody plays a role. So I think you've got your advocates that can be individuals or organizations like the ACLU who also help to arm us as legislators with the information. So it's not just the data and the facts, it's also the narrative, the stories. What is it that we need to understand about particular issues? And then it's applying the pressure. So the more people that are applying the pressure to the majority party, the more that they will in time, and trust me when I say it can move slowly, but it does make an impact. The more pressure they feel around an issue, the more inclination that they will have to, even if it's not going to pass, to maybe hear a bill in a committee. And when we talk about healthcare, I want to really use that as an example for this past session of how we were able to negotiate around an issue and get not just a hearing, but a vote on an issue. And so, as a minority party, that's a tactic that we've been using. We're having our own hearings on topics, we're having our own press conferences. And the more people that are standing with us and behind us around that issue makes a big difference in terms of the other party having to maybe pay attention. Really, what we're talking about here is an issue about prioritization. So, how can we make our priorities their priorities? And how do we move the needle so that there's more consensus around what the big issues are and how to attack those big issues?
Okay, Andrea, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, Casey, I see a question about whether there's ever been diversity in the Georgia legislature that was dropped in the
Okay, yeah, we do have a question. Has there ever been diversity in the Georgia legislature, meaning have Republicans always controlled?
So, of course, the South, we recall, went through a realignment where, Democrats, it was sort of a white supremacist Democrat control. And then there was sort of a transition period. You remember Roy Barnes at one time was governor. And then and then it sort of shifted to where Democrats became sort of the more liberal party and the more diverse party in terms of, so most, not all, most of the people of color in the legislature are Democrats, but not all. I know Jason Anaverte is Hispanic, is Republican. I'm not remembering anybody else off the top of my head. But so there has kind of been the same realignment that you've sort of seen in other states. So we have had even in recent years, we've actually had a legislature not as conservative in terms of the party in power right now. I think is more conservative than even 10 years ago. We'll remember that under Governor Deal, we were able to pass criminal justice reform. He vetoed the bathroom bill, and it was the legislature that took away his power to expand Medicaid. So, we've kind of seen a movement to the right even more than just party. But within the party, I mean, I think a lot of us were surprised when the abortion ban was introduced, for example, and that um, but unlike some other states, we haven't seen them sort of continue to push. And I'm not sure I don't think that they could pass a bill like that now when it actually is in effect. But so there's always change, and we're in a period of flux and change now. There'll be new seats open. And so, in the current session, because as Senator Halpern said, this body is reelected every 2 years in its entirety. And so there's always, every 2 years, there's an opportunity, to impact the composition of the legislature. We should see some more civil liberties inclined members come in the 2024 election, if we see the kind of voter participation from people of color that we've seen in the past.
Okay, and as we continue to look back over the session and going back a little bit further, there was the special section that had to deal with the federally mandated redistricting. Can you, Senator Halpern, update us on what things are happening in terms of that redistricting?
Yes. So you'll recall that every 10 years, when we go through the census process, we then follow that census process with reapportionment, or what we call as redistricting. And so we did that work in 2021. And I would say that the maps that we put into effect in 2021 had a lot of challenges. We called out those challenges, and there were organizations, including the ACLU and others, who actually created lawsuits about the maps and noted that they were unconstitutional and that they violated Section 2 in particular of the Voting Rights Act, which is specifically dealing with Black voters and Black voter participation, and making sure that we weren't diluting the power that Black Georgians have around voting in the people they want to have represent them. So that lawsuit proceeded. At the time, the judge had said that he had some inclination that there were challenges with the maps, but because of the timing of the 2022 election, he let them stand for 2022. But once the whole kind of trial went through, he did come back and found some very specific issues with all three of our maps, which includes our congressional map, our state house map, and our state senate map. And what he found is, in fact, that it did dilute the power of Black voters. And he asked us to go back to the drawing board and create new maps. And in his ruling, he actually specifically kind of spelled out and gave us a roadmap to how he wanted us to do that work, and said in the state Senate, there should be 2 additional majority Black districts. In the state House, there should be 6 additional majority Black districts. And in our congressional map, there should be 1 additional majority Black district. So when that ruling came down, then the governor had to set a special session, as you referenced, and he set that for November. So we went back to the Capitol in November and redrew maps again. And then so let me add a little context here, because let me just first say redistricting is considered the most partisan activity that we can undertake. And certainly in Georgia, because we, the General Assembly, are given both the authority and responsibility to draw those maps as opposed to, say, an independent commission, what happens is that the majority party, because they have the majority of votes, really gets to pass the maps that they want to pass. And that did happen again when we finished the work during the special session. Because we were responding to a judge's ruling, the judge did pretty quickly come back, and he had to let us know if we met his requirements or not. I think that we were disappointed and a bit surprised when he said that, in fact, the new maps that we drew satisfied his requirements. Let me just, again, for context, share that in the Senate, where we needed to create 2 additional majority Black districts, we did that by reconfiguring kind of existing districts. And in fact, the areas where he had told us that he was specifically concerned about Black voter dilution, we did not remedy that in the maps that stand now. Same thing in the House. And one could argue the same thing for the congressional district maps as well. But the judge ruled that they stand. At this point, the decision will need to be made by those outside organizations or new outside organizations if they will make the investment in contesting those maps. But for 2024, which is the election cycle we are in today, those maps will stand. And so it did not change the partisan makeup of any 3 of those bodies. They basically, in the Senate, 2 Democrats that were already in districts, they just made their districts majority Black. Again, they just kind of rearranged the Black people on the maps in order to satisfy the judge's ruling. And the judge said that did the trick. I anticipate that we will see lawsuits, but again, 2024, those maps stand, and we will not have any pickups, because ultimately, when you redistrict, again, going back to what I said about it being one of the most partisan activities, in fact, we've made each of our districts more entrenched and safer. So in the Senate, there's maybe one competitive district in the whole Senate. So the overall makeup of the Senate isn't expected to shift. Of the 56 senators, 23 are Democrat, 33 are Republican, barring some weird, kind of outcome. It will remain that when we go back into session in 2025.
So, Andrea, do you think it was more the letter of the law as opposed to the spirit when these districts were reformed?
I don't really understand. I really don't understand Judge Jones frankly, allowing those districts to stand because, one of the challenges is because the Supreme Court has eroded the Voting Rights Act to the extent that it has. I think that was maybe one reason he was afraid to push the envelope. And there was, technically, uh, the legislature went in and created more majority Black districts, but we maintained in our argument that they did not create these districts were already electing the preferences of Black voters, right? So if you were to look at these districts, the person who was filling the seat was the person that Black voters supported in the primary. So, but these things become very technical, and unfortunately, under the Voting Rights Act, the standards of proof are very technical, and I think very much the legislature violated the spirit of the order, but the judge felt that they complied, I think, with the letter of the law in terms of the order. But suffice it to say, though, all of the population growth in the state of Georgia in the last decade was among communities of color, Black, Asian American, Hispanic. And so to not create new districts for any of those populations. The other thing is, in some ways, it works against the Black population under the Voting Rights Act because we work in coalition with all the other communities of color. So if you look at Gwinnett, Gwinnett, which is the most diverse county maybe in the whole country, but their top office holders are African American. Now, that's not a majority Black county, but it is a county where Black voters are able to elect the people of their choice. So it becomes there in some ways, because African Americans have been such impactful leaders, the legislature, the party that controls the legislature, kind of use that to our disadvantage to sort of say, well, they just sort of packed more Black folks into districts where Black voters were already electing the candidates of their choice and ignored some of the areas that Judge Jones. But we are um, we are in litigation over this, partly because the state of Georgia is appealing even the original order that resulted in the revised maps. So the litigation is continuing. But we're also now looking to 2030 because this process happens again in 2030. And the population in terms of voters of color is continuing to grow. That continues to be where the growth is, in the state. And also, frankly, we have a lot of folks who are eligible to vote, who are not participating. And so we need people to really understand that, especially, and as we'll get to, when we maybe talk about some of the bills that were before the legislature this year. I mean, your health care is dependent on people in the state legislature. The laws, what is considered a crime, these things are decided by members of the legislature. What kind of license do you need to practice your profession? This is decided by people in the legislature. And so understanding that the Georgia legislature has a tremendous amount of power over your day-to-day life and the life of your children and family and people that you care about. And so it's really important for us to be active in fighting for. And I would say to Senator Halpern, in the House, we are going to see some flips.
Yes.
We are going to see some flips in the House, and particularly those of you who are on the call, who are in the Macon area, who are down around, Albany and Southwest Georgia. There are opportunities to pick up and elect people who are more in favor of civil rights and civil liberties and women's rights than the people currently holding those seats.
And does that include like all of the counties in Georgia? Because I know that outside of, the Atlanta area and maybe Macon and some of those, and Columbus and some of those other areas, how do we reach those people and get them to understand that they can make an impact, and how do they make an impact?
Well, our links chapters out there have a mandate from the president, the national president, to get out there and talk and register voters and get people committed to participating. So, I hope we can continue to be in conversation, and, to the extent that links who are in, safe seats like Senator Halpern's in Atlanta, maybe if links in Albany or Fort Valley or Columbus need some support, I think we need to be prepared to offer them some support. Either we can phone bank, we can go out there if they're having a registration drive. Let's support our sisters that are, in the areas outside for the metro counties. But I will say, we need to increase the participation in the metro counties as well. DeKalb alone could decide this election. If DeKalb were to vote, 60, 70% turnout, they could decide the outcome of this election.
I would only add that, it's all those coalition partners, right? The NAACP, I think, has people in every county throughout the state, and it is really letting people understand how the work that we do impacts people's lives daily. And there's also more of a movement, remember, too, nationally, to bring things back down to states' rights and allowing individual states to make a determination about what laws will be on some kind of primary issues, including, abortion, for example, and reproductive rights in general. And so I think the more people realize that the action is at the state legislative level, the more engaged people will become. But we have to tell that story. There is a little bit of sense in Georgia because you've got just the largest mass of people in the state are right here in the metro area. We do often put an inordinate focus on the metro area because that's where the density of the people are. And so we need to make sure that we shore up the metro area. But we need to not forget that there are lots of pockets of people around the rest of the state who also need to have a door knocked, who also need to have a phone call made and to feel like they can be spoken to, but for them to be invited to participate, because so many people feel disconnected. And if nobody reaches out to them, it will continue to give them that sense of isolation in this process. It's our job collectively to really invite them to the table and explain to them why, if they're not already registered to vote, they need to do so. Make sure that they're educated on the timeline. No, TIS too, because we were talking about redistricting. I think it's important for folks to know, and I know y'all are from, lots of different places, but in Fulton County, as one example, 80% of Fulton County residents have been impacted by our redistricting decisions, whether that's at the congressional level, the state house, or the state senate. That means 80% of Fulton County residents have a new or in a new district, and may have even today, right, based on the way the lines are drawn, a new representative. And they don't necessarily know. So it's also working with our county election boards to make sure that people understand that a lot of change has happened from the end of last year to this next voting period. So when we vote in May 21st is the primary. When we vote in May, it will be based on these new maps. So if your district number has changed, that's something to look out for. You can always go to your My Voter page, sos.mvp.com, to check to see what are your precincts, if those have changed, what are your districts for all three um, levels of races. and start to be able to research who the people are that will be on your ballot.
Mhm. Yeah, and we're going to walk through that before the end of this program.
before
So
the end of this
how to
program.
use that My Voter page, and for you and for your family members, and making sure that your information is accurate. And that's a really important point, that who your representatives are now, whose districts are
Mhm.
you in, and
Mhm.
this is a primary, so sometimes there'll be multiple people running. You need to look up and see what you can find out about their positions.
Okay, and we actually have a question coming from one of our viewers, and their question is, who are the swing voters that we need to pay special attention to during the legislative or during the political season, this political season?
I will tell you, I think we all need to be talking to our kids, because there's a lot of misinformation out there. A lot of kids, rightly so, are very upset about what's happening in Gaza right now. And so I think we need to talk to our kids about, why protest voting is not something that is in their interest. Because we are right now in a fight for whether we if in November we are voting to decide whether there will be voting. Will there be democracy? That's what's on the ballot in November. And that has to be the primary motivator for people voting at the national level, is we're voting to continue democracy. At the local level, it's also important our young people understand, Hope Scholarship is decided at the legislature.
Mhm.
Whether or not there's, bail reform is, happening at the legislature. What kinds of rights around, your personal liberty, your right to protest. We had to defeat a bill that would have criminalized protest and
Mhm.
create. And you see what's happening right now, where even in places like New York, they're
Mhm.
calling the police on kids who are protesting. I mean, students. And so, we're in a time now where we have to really defend our civil liberties and our right to disagree with the people that we are electing. So we need to talk to the younger people in our family. A lot of kids also, they didn't experience segregation like I did. So they can sort of say, oh well, there's not this much difference between this one and that one. The
Right.
orange one and the one with the aviator shades. But they need to understand what it really means to go back. Women are experiencing, our daughters are experiencing what it means to lose rights that you have taken for granted. They have lost them in the state of Georgia for now. We're still fighting that. So I think, this for me is about it is about our people in our circle, and making sure people in our close and extended circle understand how important it is that they participate, especially not only in November, but absolutely in November.
Senator Halpern, you want to weigh in on this?
I mean, I certainly agree with that. It's a funny thing, this question about swing voters, right? So many people who are already part of the kind of who are already thinking about voting are decided, right? So, like, who are the swing voters is a good question. I think focusing also on the people who vote every now and again, but are not the people who like vote every time. I'm a super voter. Every time there's a chance to vote, I vote. How can we identify the folks that are have less of a propensity to vote every time and make sure they vote? Then we still have quite a number of people in this state who just don't vote at all. How do we identify those people? And listen, these are not people who necessarily have not yet um, in uh, they're on the voter rolls. They just don't vote. right? So it's not that we need to find them and sign them up. There's a whole, pocket of people that we have to sign up to vote to begin with. And then we've got to work to get them to make sure not just that they're signed up and can vote, but that they actually do go vote. But there's also people who just don't vote. These are the people that we need to talk to. I think that we need to better understand why it is that they're not participating. What are the disappointments that they have around the process? How do we make them understand that, as we say all the time, the arc of the universe bends towards justice, and even though change may not happen as quickly as we want it to, it's only going to happen if all of us are pushing and kind of rowing in the same direction. So, I mean, the swing voter question, it's such an interesting question because who doesn't know where they sit on this issue right now? And so it's not so much, I think, that there's swing voters. It's more that people don't understand, like Andrea said, that the protest vote isn't additive to the process. And that we do have, even voting for a third party vote isn't additive to the process. We have, like it or love it, a two-party system. The winner is going to be one of those two parties, and even just accepting that as the reality, and then trying to help all of us come back to a world in which, um, without sacrificing your values and integrity, but in which, kind of bipartisanship or some compromise or statesmanship is something that we're really trying to have happen, because otherwise you get a gridlock. And if you've got just winners and losers and it's all or nothing, whose community is going to get the nothing, right? It's much more likely that it's going to be our communities that get nothing. So anyway, we have to participate, but I think underscoring that for everybody that you talk to, also recognizing that all of us have our own spheres of influence and really using those and making sure that we're talking it up, even to people that we think, of course, they would be voting, making sure that we're still having those conversations so everybody understands what's on the line.
And know that your vote does indeed count, because sometimes the count is very close.
Most of our recent election cycles, the counts have been close if you think about it. Biden won by 11,500 votes in a state of 10 million plus people.
And
I mean,
5 million votes cast. 5 million votes cast. It was decided by 11,000 votes.
Yeah. So it's very important. We've been talking, and I can't believe how fast the time is going. We do want to get to Senator, your land grant information that you have a really particular closeness to. But first, Andrea, let's just talk a little bit about some of the issues that the ACLU found of particular interest this particular session. And Senator, please feel free to weigh in on any one of these.
So maybe if we could just quickly go through sort of the PowerPoint that has the highlights. So, a lot of these issues that we were going through, and we can go to the next slide, voting rights, First Amendment issues that we fight every year to protect, consumer privacy, criminal justice reform. We can go to the next one. So voting rights, there's an opportunity still to call the governor to veto SB 189, which was a bill that makes it very difficult, not only for people to vote, but for the election boards to even function. It would encourage more challenges to voters. It makes it more difficult to count absentee ballots. They want you to count them within an hour of the polls closing. It takes the Secretary of State off of the election board, makes it harder for homeless people to to participate as voters. So we're urging people to call the governor to veto this bill. 404-656-1776. And this is so this is one of the real calls to action that we have out right now. And there's more information about that also on our ACLU of Georgia website. If we could go to the next slide. Criminal legal reform. You know, one of the things I said about our country, our state legislature sort of moving to the right, uh, we had passed bail reform. Much of the increase that we're seeing, the crowding that we're seeing in our jails, is because people are being kept there pre-trial just before because they can't pay bond. And this actually would make that problem worse and remove signature bond from 30 different offenses. So we're also calling on people to call the governor to veto this bill as well. And this is one we will likely sue over if he signs it. Um, you can keep going, and we'll just run through these really quick because we want to hear about. We did have some success. We defeated a so-called religious freedom bill, which would have made it easy for people to discriminate against LGBT people on the basis, saying, "Well, it's my religion." We've seen that in some of the Supreme Court cases. You can go on to the next one. We were able to prevent more punishments for peaceful protesters. There was a very dangerous bill that would have made it more difficult for protests. We know how impactful protest has been in the history of Georgia in particular, and even just recently, the George Floyd Ahmaud Arbery series of protests, Black Lives Matter. Keep going. There's also this bill that pretended to protect us from our personal biometric information, our fingerprints, eye scans, facial scans. Now if you go to the airport, they're scanning your face. We have a stronger bill, and we'll be working to get a bill that really does protect people and their personal biometric information. Next. So that's just wanted to go through that very quickly.
I,
More of this information is on the website. And Sonia, I don't know if you have any.
Well, I was just going to point out that every single bill that you just went through, people may notice it had SB in front of the bill number. The SB stands for Senate bill. So just to clarify that a lot of the bills that were not good bills actually were generated in the chamber in which I sit. So the way that the interplay works, because really the ACLU was very effective in getting those bills defeated, the ones that were. There are times that the Senate, especially if these bills are pushed by members of the Senate leadership on the Republican side, and it's an election year. Remember, I said that at the beginning. So there are bills that are going to be passing at least through a chamber so that people can go back home and talk about it up in their district. Even if it's a dangerous bill, it gives them bragging rights back at home for their base. And so the fact that these bills were able to be defeated really is a testament to the work and the collaboration or coordination between efforts, often with the advocacy organization and the chamber in which is then receiving the bill. Sometimes we can ameliorate bills in the Senate. I don't know that that's true of any of these, but sometimes we know it's going to pass in the Senate. We're going to try to make the bill a little bit better, offering amendments in committee or off on the floor, and send it over to the House better than it was going to arrive in the House, and then work with leadership in the House in order to be able to keep it from going all the way through the process or keep it from going on the floor of the House, even if it passes out of committee. There's a couple of different places at which we can try to stop a bill. But the ones that gain a lot of steam and momentum are very difficult to stop. And so the ones that are on the way to the governor's desk are examples of that. But it's just a reminder that even when it's at the governor's desk, he's got 40 days from the time the legislative session ends to do one of three things. He can sign the bill into law, he can veto a bill, or he can do nothing with the bill, in which case it goes into effect. And so there is still time on the bills that we are very against to make a move and a motion towards the governor's office specifically with calls or emails and ask him to please veto the bill, in which case it will die. It will be killed.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, um, we have so many things that we like to continue to talk about. And Senator, we hope that you can come back on another time and talk to us about some of these other things. But there was one bill that was particularly close to supporters of HBCUs and financial fairness in institutions of higher learning. And it has to do with the state of Georgia's land grant universities. There are presently two land grant universities, and they are the University of Georgia, with its Flagstaff campus located in Athens, Georgia, and Fort Valley State University located in Fort Valley, Georgia. So, just a little bit of history. The University of Georgia was chartered in 1785 and is one of the oldest public universities in the US. Originally open only to white males, it was open to white women in 1903. Full racial integration finally occurred in 1961. Fort Valley State University was formerly Fort Valley State College, and it began with the 1939 consolidation of Fort Valley High and the State Teachers and Industrial College of Forsyth. In 1947, the State Board of Regents adopted a resolution that moved the land grant designation from Savannah State College to Fort Valley State College. In response to that, in 1949, the Georgia General Assembly officially designated the Fort Valley State College as the land grant college for Negroes in Georgia. Public education was then segregated. So, Senator Halpern, just a little bit of background there. You have your pulse on this land grant question, so you can just take it and tell us how you feel about it, what exactly would happen with this, and what we can do.
Thank you. So, Georgia has 10 historically Black colleges and universities. Fort Valley State is our land grant. It is one of 3 public HBCUs in our state. The other 7 are all private, 6 of which are right here in Atlanta and part of the Atlanta University Center. So, Fort Valley State being the other land grant institution, couple of things that we know. The way that the state funds our schools is based on a formula. And we know that historically there has been underfunding to our HBCUs. And part of that formula is derived from enrollment. And so, the schools that have higher capacity, the schools that have higher endowments, the schools that just have alumni with more resources that pour back into the school end up being the schools with additional revenue tracks, right? Most of our HBCUs are really heavily reliant on their tuition. So, a couple of things about Fort Valley State. Fort Valley State, being a land grant institution, has a requirement from the federal government in terms of how it's funded. So the federal government provides money to the school as it does UGA, but there is an expectation around the state portion and a match from the state as well. This past maybe about 6 months ago, so October, November timeframe, the U.S. Department of Education sent a letter to the state of Georgia, specifically to the governor of the state, outlining the fact that they believe that Fort Valley State, our HBCU land grant, has been underfunded by $603 million over the last 30 years.
Wow.
Fort Valley State is much older than 30 years old. And so their estimation of that 603 million was just over a 30-year time frame. I think that, if you extrapolate, what you can guess is that if you take the time frame back further into the 1800s, you will find that it's much more money that this school has been denied. And that means that the resources aren't what it could be. That means the programs aren't what it could be. That means the growth of the school has been stunted due to that lack of funding. So the state of Georgia right now is in a position where it needs to respond, and we're very hopeful that in fact the state will make good on that underfunding. I anticipate that to be a long journey. That is not going to be a straight line. I know that there are many people who, because we have such a surplus right now at the state, believe that the state is just going to and should just give us that money. I'm not as faithful or hopeful in that regard, but I do think that we're going to need to remedy the underfunding that that school has had historically. In the meantime, what I have been working on deeply since I got to the legislature is our HBCUs. I believe very much in the need for their growth. I believe in their need for sustainability. And when you look out into the larger higher ed landscape, you are starting to see consolidation of many smaller liberal arts colleges throughout the country. I don't want that to be the end result of any of our HBCUs, and certainly not our three public ones that are so important and have been educating students for generations. And take in students too, by the way, I mean, you all know this, but take in students too, who are still to this day are first generation college students or students who were not adequately prepared coming out of their public education system to really succeed and excel at college, but get to an HBCU and are supported in such a way that they do get through to graduation. So I had a study committee that I chaired in 2022. At the time, Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan was the president of our Senate and lieutenant governor, and he created that study committee, had me chair it, and it was really focused on excellence, innovation, and technology at our schools. What are the things that our schools need? What are the successes that they have? What are the challenges that they have? And one of my goals in the work that we did as a bipartisan committee was really to establish an understanding of why these schools are important beyond their historical significance. And if we see them as assets to the state, then maybe the 236 members of the Georgia General Assembly, most of whom don't have an HBCU in their district, have never set foot on an HBCU, could prioritize them higher than we have because we have competing priorities. So we had this study committee, and one of the recommendations that came out of it was to create what we're calling HBCU Innovation, Technology, and Economic Planning Districts. And that designation as a district, you've heard of community CIDs, community improvement districts, opportunity zones, innovation hubs. Those designations really provide a focus for where dollars can flow, and they unlock resources. So, assuming that the state is not going to be ready today, tomorrow, in a month to actually give and pour in the dollars that we need, how might we still get the resources that we need by approaching it differently? So, town and gown, university driven economic development. How do we make sure that the neighborhoods in which these schools sit have the investments that would actually help support the schools as well? And that's really the premise of the bill. And so it's it's now dead because we're at the end of this biennium, but it did pass out of the Senate this year. I will continue to work on this idea. But the thought is most of our schools sit today in disinvested communities, and there are shared infrastructure needs between the communities and the schools. So, how can we get them the resources that they need separate from the state? There's tons of federal money available right now today for our HBCUs. There's philanthropic dollars, corporate dollars. So how do we answer for things like digital infrastructure and broadband? How do we answer for things like housing or sidewalks that can connect up to the gates of the campus, or creating small business incubators in the communities in which these schools sit so that the anchor institutions are supported by the community and vice versa? That's kind of the concept. It is not a novel policy idea. This is a decades old policy idea. The innovation is that it would use HBCUs as that anchor. We already do this in this state around military bases for economic development. Opportunity zones is not a new thing. It's really recognizing HBCUs as a distinct asset and leveraging that asset for economic development, workforce development, and community development for the benefit of the school. One other thing, and then I know we're running low on time. One of the things that I am proud that we were able to achieve this year, and I will say, I'll come back to that. But one of the things that we were able to achieve is that we were able to appropriate $100,000 to Fort Valley State University, specifically to be used for a feasibility study for a vet school. You might know that in January, it was announced that UGA, that other land grant institution, would be now will house a medical school, and 100-something million dollars was appropriated towards that. Well, Georgia has exactly one vet school. It is at UGA. Georgia also has a shortage of large and small animal vets, and the veterinary program that's already existing at Fort Valley State, if we could grow it to a full-blown vet school, I think it would be transformational, not just for that university, but for that region of our state as well. And so, will they get a vet school? I can't promise you that, but I know for sure that without a feasibility study, they absolutely wouldn't. And they don't have $100,000 laying around for a feasibility study. So that is something that Fort Valley State is working on now, and I'm excited to see the end result of that.
And we're hoping and hoping that we can see something really positive come from this also. So you said it's going to be a long process. So you have kind of ideas of how you want it to progress over time?
Yes. So I should say too that when I did the study committee, the recommendations really took a longer range approach, right? So I knew that I wanted a multi-pronged, multi-year approach to enhancing the schools. So some of these are beginning steps, and I know that we will be able to build on them. The other thing that we have launched in the Senate, we haven't officially announced it, but I am also working to launch an HBCU caucus to model off of the congressional HBC caucus, which is bipartisan, bicameral. So my co-chair in the Senate happens to be our president pro tem, which is kind of the number 2 person in the Senate. He represents Fort Valley State. And then I hope to have the commensurate one in the House established in 2024. And together, the HBCU caucus can really be used to highlight issues, to dig in and do the work needed to continue for us to advance the schools, but also advance conversations around these schools. My goal is that HBCUs are part of the conversation. To me, it's a win when our lieutenant governor now talks about HBCUs after visiting them, as he's talking about our technical college system and our 26 school university system, and recognizes HBCUs as an important piece of a workforce development conversation.
And of course, look to us to help raise awareness and let us know what we can do to help to make all of this come into fruition. Senator Halpern, thank you so much for being with us. We had so much to talk about. I can't believe how quickly the time passed. So I do hope that you'll come back to talk to us again.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Okay. Thank you so much. And Andrea, we were going to talk a little bit about voter registration. We're going to go a little bit past our hour, but that's what.
Yeah, we can just put up, thank you. You heard us mention checking your live voter page. You heard Senator Halpern say that. And so we just wanted to give you a little bit of what these things look like and really encourage you to do this, to go to the My Voter page, on the, at the Secretary of State has. You can Google My Voter page, Georgia. And when you go to that page, it gives you a place to log in. And you can then walk through and you can register, or you can, almost more importantly now for, is check that, who is your representative. You can go to the next page on that, Melanie. You can flip over. So you can check your information, make sure that it's accurate. It can tell you where your precinct is. You can check to see where are early voting sites that you can use. If you can click on, you can see at the bottom right, you can click on looking at your sample ballots. If you go to the next page, it'll show you um, what your ballot looks like, where you're, these are the locations where you're voting. This is your polling place information. If you keep going through, I think the sample ballots are in there somewhere. Um, your absentee ballot. So if you send in an absentee ballot, you can go on and check, has it been received? Has it been mailed out? So you can call your county board of election if there's some delay in that. Um, you keep going through there. I'm trying to look at this on um, my too small thing. Who your elected officials are. Do you have a new senator? Do you have a new House of Representatives? So you can start to look up. That's right. So here's your sample ballot. So if you do that now before the primary, you can see when you go into that polling place, what is your ballot going to look like? You can look through. There are a lot of folks like judges, folks you don't hear about a lot, that you can you can research, so you can get more information. So there's a question about the mail-in ballot. The time now for using absentee ballots is very compressed. You can request them online, but they're not going to be mailed out until about the week before early voting starts. So a lot of us have found it easier to go ahead and do the vote in that early. We have 3 weeks of early voting. We have 2 Saturdays. But the important thing is that you and your family plan your vote. You may have someone in your family that needs to vote by mail. So if there's someone in your household that can't get out easily, you can help them request an absentee ballot, and you can take it to a drop box for them. There are many places where maybe when you go early vote, someone in your household, you can take their mail-in ballot to a early voting to a drop box that's inside of a polling place. So they've made it more difficult. It's not easy like it was in 2020 to use the mail-in system. But for people in your household for whom getting around is difficult or challenging, um, that process is still available, but the time is much shorter. You want to keep going? I think we're just showing a few, um, what this early voting looks like. You can also update your information. So understand that your driver's license is not to verify your address. It's to verify who you are. But you do want to update your address, and particularly the young people in your lives, people who are moving around a lot, to update their address in the system, so that there's no confusion when they go to vote and they go vote in the right place. I'm going to keep going. So these are all things that you can do. You can also download this app on your phone. You can uh, uh, flush on through. This is also updating the address. You can update this on your phone. You can sit with members of your family and do it with them. So this is one of the things, we have a mandate from our national president to register 300 voters each chapter. I think for all of us, we need to be ambassadors, proselytizers for participating in our elections. And a lot of times people, who seem like, oh, that doesn't really matter. Sometimes they don't really know the process. They don't really know how to do it. They need someone, to sort of kindly, with non-judgmentally, just kind of encourage them and walk them through. So this is what, we just want to give people the information so that they can be full participants in our democracy. We need everybody on the playing field right now.
Absolutely, everybody. So thank you, Andrea. And that's going to do it for this edition of NewsLink. Thank you so much for joining us. Camelia Rose would also like to thank Georgia Senator Sonia Halpern for joining us, and ACLU Executive Director Andrea Young Thomas, who you will see again because we're going to call on her for a lot of things in the future, and we're going to see the senator again as well. April marks the end of our calendar year. The Legislative Issues, Public Affairs, and Disaster Recovery Committee of Camelia Rose really enjoyed bringing you these podcasts and hope you found the information presented both useful, entertaining, and informative. We look forward to bringing you more beginning in September. We hope you'll join us, and all podcasts are available for reviewing. I am Dr. Katrina Covington Whitmore, and we will see you in September.
Great. Thank you.